Welcome everyone to day 2 of History and Systems of Psychology. I hope the first couple of days of the semester have gone really well. What I thought we would do is start with a little bit of a review over the first PowerPoint for actually the intro chapter, because it's chock full of information. So what I'd like to begin with is talking about the different ways of studying history. Who can give me a way that we discussed? So there's some different terms you'll need to be familiar with for the exam.
Examine data, experiments, and methods.
Okay, so that's one of the benefits of studying history, right? Yeah, good.
Historiography is one.
We are on camera. Historiography, right? And what is that?
Term for the theory, history, methods, and assumptions of writing history.
Just 1 second. Yes. Okay. All right, thank you for that. Others, internalism.
Thinking about ideas in their context.
Yeah, so when we're looking at something through an internalist lens, we're thinking about ideas within the intellectual context that they exist. That's different than an externalist point of view, which is considering the outside world, socio-political climate, etc., when we look at history. So I think that we need a little bit of just a reminder about these terms. What I have pulled up is some information about Steve Jobs. So based on what you know about Steve Jobs, what can you tell me about him?
He claimed he did things that he didn't do.
Okay, so you definitely have an opinion, Ashley, of that. All right, and we'll come back to that. So you've examined some sources that have something to say about that. Okay, what is he known for? That maybe he did or didn't do, right? Apple, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so he was the CEO of Apple. So let's think about some of our approaches. So if we examine Steve Jobs or we examine Apple through the great man approach, we would be examining Steve Jobs. Okay, he is the CEO, and we would not consider all the many people who helped him get in that position or who played a large role. Right. And so with the great man approach, we need to be really careful when we examine someone solely through that lens, right? Okay. Now let's think about Steve Jobs in terms of the historiography that's often told about him. Do you hear him portrayed most of the time in negative ways, or is it pretty positive? Negative for you, okay.
I think the more like public, the general idea is like positive.
Yeah. Yeah, and so that would be for a lot of people more of a celebratory thing. So we're looking at Steve Jobs, we're looking at this great man, he accomplished all these things, okay? If we examine Apple through the lens of a Zeitgeist approach, what would we be doing? What does Zeitgeist stand for? Tyler, any ideas?
What's that?
Zeitgeist?
The spirit of the time.
Yeah, exactly, the spirit of the time. So what was going on around the time frame that Apple was in development, right? So there were certain things, there had been a lot of advances in terms of our understanding of technology, et cetera.
The rise of the internet?
Huh?
Like the rise of the internet?
Exactly, right. So it was a good time for Steve Jobs to live, right? Because those things were going on. Had they not been going on, had those external factors not occurred, we may not know him for anything, right? And so when you consult the internet for information, you need to be what? In terms of being a consumer of the information.
Unbiased?
You need to try to be as unbiased as possible. And we tend to, as human creatures, we're fairly biased, okay? Does anyone know what confirmation bias is? Yeah, what can you tell me about that?
Our values and beliefs come into what we censor, I guess, within our information that's given to us.
Yeah, exactly. So when you are on, I'm old, so I'm primarily still on Facebook, I know, but I do have an Instagram page. But as I go through and I look at ads and things like that, my feed is actually censored for me, right? And so this idea of confirmation bias, it's giving me information that relates to things I already believe in. So it is underscoring these things rather than giving me the whole picture, right? And that in a larger context can lead to a lot of divisiveness, right? So that's the idea of confirmation bias. We're taking in or we're being given information that solidifies what we already believe, okay? All right. For the exam, like I said, you'll need to know the different terms. So you'll need to know the different ways that history can be studied in those terms. I want to say there's at least 8 of them, but beyond that, you'll need to be able to give an example. And so what that will require is going a little bit beyond flashcards and memorization, right? So during class, at the start of class, we'll generally take time to do that, to sort of get class rolling. I think it's really important that we don't just walk in here and I have you learn new things. We need to build on things. So having said that, are there any questions about the intro chapter or class on Tuesday as a whole? Feeling pretty good about things? Yeah? Maybe this way? Okay. All right. So this is what you get just as an aside of, you learn about Steve Jobs through Wikipedia. Okay, but you can also learn about him in many other ways. All right. Wanted to let you know that I considered thoughtfully what I was going to present to you today. Now, you do have a Chapter 1 PowerPoint, which is linked to the actual textbook. So it was a PowerPoint created by the authors, and that provides a really nice overview of the entire chapter. However, as an overview, it's pretty broad. So what I did last night and before this class is I created what I call detailed notes PowerPoint. So that's going to have more detail that I want you to glean. Although Chapter 1 has a lot of information that is all valuable, as it pertains to this class, some of that information we need to latch onto and unpack a little bit more than the other information. So it's my hope that your second PowerPoint that will accompany the first PowerPoints for all of the chapters will do that for you. Okay, so we are going to look at our PowerPoint for today. And for those of you who read ahead, in Chapter 1, who and what are we going to be learning about? We're going to be learning a lot about philosophers, right? Okay. Any names you might remember?
I saw Socrates on there.
You saw Socrates, and he is very important. Who else?
Plato.
Good.
Aristotle.
Aristotle, who was a student of Plato, right? How about the person known as the father of medicine? You've heard of the Hippocratic Oath? What does that mean?
The part everybody usually remembers is the first do no harm.
Yeah, and that's what we'll be talking about mainly in terms of Hippocrates. So there's a video that we're going to watch that I think is super interesting that talks about Hippocrates, his early life, and how the influence of his father and family led to him pursuing the field of medicine, and then how he was able to add to what was going on in terms of healing and things of that nature. So I think you'll find it particularly interesting. Well, let's see. We're going to go this way. So before we begin and dive into learning about the philosophers, I want to take a moment and talk about the tree of history. I was going to bring in this really stubby Christmas tree that I had that was about this big and about this tall, and I thought that's not going to accurately depict the limbs, right? Because there's the base and then there's just little branches going up like this. So when we talk about the history of psychology, I want you to think of a really big tree, okay? It's tall and it's wide. We can consider the roots of the tree of psychology as beginning with the contributions made by Greek philosophers. And I say that about psychology, but almost any discipline you can think of, the roots, there are going to be some really firm roots in philosophy, whatever you do. So we could think about having many trees, and this is our MANY trees, and this is our psychology tree. So contributions made by the Greek philosophers were numerous, and although the philosophers we're going to be talking about share some commonalities, and you can sort of see how one influenced the other, they all have their unique approach to understanding the world, understanding the mind, and also unique interests. So as time went on, branches from these philosophers grew, and numerous offshoots developed. So let's just think about branches of psychology. When we look at undergraduate courses, how many of you have taken abnormal psychology or plan to take it? Good. I've heard that's a really interesting class. And what does abnormal psychology study?
All of the abnormalities.
I like it, yes, all of the abnormalities. So it's going to study psychological disorders, etc. And I think that's pretty fascinating to learn about, okay? We also have social psychology, which is also what it sounds like. We're looking at psychology, but we're also considering the social considerations. So in what way might society shape our thinking, etc. Okay? Other kinds of psychology that may not be included as actual courses here, but at really large schools for undergrads, is evolutionary psychology. And when you think of evolutionary psychology, hopefully Darwin comes to mind. Okay? And we will have an entire chapter devoted to Darwin and his impact on psychology. I mean, his impact on biology was enormous, but also his lasting impact on psychology was significant. Okay, any questions on that? What are some other psychology classes we offer here that you've taken? Intro, right? Yeah, child psychology.
End of life.
End of life, okay, so looking at later life and death. Anything else?
Sports.
Sports psychology, yeah, I teach that one. So psychology of personality. So we have lots of different courses within our small department alone. Okay. All right, did you have a chance to look at the video on laurel wreaths and togas? In case you haven't, we're just going to rewatch this. I thought it was interesting, right? So we see Greeks and Romans, and I don't know, when I close my eyes, if I were to be thinking about them, I'm not sure on what occasion I would be thinking about them, except this semester I'm thinking about them a lot. And I would close my eyes and I would picture little tree-like entities. I guess we call those leaves on top of the head, right? And these flowing togas. So let's take a look at these two short videos and then we will move on.
When we think of ancient Rome, we tend to think of Rome at its height, a majestic city of marble, and at its heart, the Colosseum. Here, gladiators joined in combat, presided over, we imagine, by the emperor, and atop his head was a laurel wreath. In Greece, these had been given to the victorious in athletic or poetic competitions. However, in Rome, they were associated with victory in battle and accompanied a triumphal march through the heart of the city. Long before Rome was a marbled city, probably the most famous wreath wearer of all time is Gaius Julius Caesar. He took to wearing the wreath in everyday life, and it is thought by some that this was an attempt to cover up his increasingly receding hairline. However, it did signify his triumph every day. It may also have been a rather cunning way in a republic of wearing a crown without wearing a crown. When we think of ancient Rome,
Okay.
we tend to think
We'll
of
just
Rome
watch
at
it
its
once.
height,
How about that?
a majestic
Okay, so not everyone ran around with leaves on their heads, okay? That was the select few, the exceptional individuals as they would define them back in Greek and Roman times. All right, and lest we forget, we'll just check out the toga history. Right, here we go.
What is a toga and why was it worn in ancient Rome? Rome was a place where togas flourished. Togas were everyday, festive, and sometimes even highly specialized, such as the toga of a candidate for office. In fact, it was a blanket of sheep's wool of semicircular shape, folded and tied in the right places. The length of this semicircle could be up to 6 meters or more. It is about a quarter shorter than a double-decker British bus. It is 8 meters long. The toga was worn over a tunic, which used to be the only attribute of underwear. Not about any pants or underwear speech did not go. Occasionally in the bath could put on a thigh bandage. The toga itself was allowed to wear only a citizen of Rome, and the rest of it was strictly forbidden. Only men could wear it, and it was...
Okay, so just a little bit of background on the toga. Will not be on the exam, but this is more trivia for you. All right, see if I can pull this back up. Okay, great. All right, so we are moving into chapter 1, and if you have the book online or otherwise, you may want to follow along. So we are now in chapter 1, which is talking about foundational ideas from antiquity. All right, we're going to start by talking a little bit about the movement to and development of Greece. So, if we think back to long ago, 400 years before Plato's time, settlers from the Peloponnesian Peninsula of present-day Greece spread out and established many prosperous Greek-speaking colonies. Okay, so you have a lot of settlers gathered in this one area. Over time, they dispersed to and formed different colonies. Okay? Now, not all of those colonies were created equally. So you establish a colony, you've got to have your own rules, right? And in terms of governance, there was a lot of difference between these colonies. So they developed differently. Some were kingdoms. So these were colonies that were governed by a king. The king had all of the say, right? And so you can imagine if you were in a kingdom, that's going to look a little bit different than being in a democracy, right? The second type of governance was the oligarchy. Okay, and what that means is, in a way, it's kingdom-ish. It is governed by a select few members of society. Okay, so now we've gone from one person having rule over the colony to several people having rule over the colony. And that worked for a while, right? And we still see things like that around the world. But what's really important for this chapter is for us to spend some time talking about the development of democracies. So they've been around in some fashion or form since around 500 BC. Okay, so when we talk about what democracies look like, what we're talking about is back in the day around 500 BC. So political decisions were made by collective votes, and that sounds great. that sounds like everyone would get a say, right? But look at this, collective votes of all qualified citizens. Okay? So a couple of questions. Who made the decision as to who was qualified or not? What did that criteria look like? And why was that necessary? This was definitely a step in a new direction, but most inhabitants did not meet qualifying criteria. So although we're on our way to more of a democracy as we know it today, we still have a fairly select number of people making decisions for the entire colony. So we have a lot of inhabitants that don't have a lot of voice in social and political matters. However, there was a real unification within Greece and a pride in the common language. Okay, and there's some might say some good reasons for that. But it was to the extent that other people who did not speak Greek were called barbaros, which ended up turning into the word barbaric. Okay, into the word barbaric. And the syllables bar were said to mimic people who spoke what they called the ugly languages, or people who were, these were less, the languages of the less educated, okay? And like I said, the bar provided the origin for the word barbaric. So when you use that word, which I would guess it doesn't come up a whole lot, you can think about that. Any questions? Okay, so we're tracing the history, we're looking at the governance, and then we're going to go in and look at some particularly important people within psychology in more detail. But before we do that, there's some important early words to take a glance at. So logos or logi is word or reason. And over time, that's come to be more akin to the study of something, right? So sociology, the study of society. Philo is love. Sophia, does anyone know someone who's named Sophia? Okay, so that means wisdom. I don't know if you would have tell them or not, but but you might give them that information. And then Sonia is a diminutive, which is like a little tiny version of Sophia. And so maybe that means sort of wise. I don't know, but I'm going to say it still means wisdom, maybe just lowercase. All right, we are moving into talking about some people. Depending on who you ask, this is pronounced Thales, or if you live in France or speak French, Talus. So it really depends on who you ask. But regardless of what pronunciation you use, I'm going to go with Thales. This person lived from 624 to 526 BC. And in so many ways, really ahead of the times. He was known for his accurate accounts of both astronomical and also of meteorological observations, and that is a mouthful, all right? So what was going on basically up in the sky and with our weather, which also would be up in the sky. He promoted the idea that water was the most important element in the cosmos. So long ago, there was so much talk about elements, right? So air was another example. But his idea was that water was the most important element within the cosmos. Something he's famously known for, or infamously known for, is his well incident. Did any of you read that? No? So in looking at the cosmos and looking upwards to the heavens, as they would call it, he actually fell into a well. So that's the well incident I refer to, and it gives us just a little bit more detail in the textbook. Okay, a couple more terms we need to be familiar with. The term psyche was originally the term for breath. Okay? And the Greeks thought, Well, breath is present in the living person but absent after death. Okay, so the living person has a psyche because they are breathing. The Latin translation of psyche is anima and is the root for animal and animated, which would also mean alive things, right? So animate and inanimate, you've heard of animate and inanimate objects maybe? Yeah, objects that move and don't move. This would be alive and not alive, respectively. Okay, moving more into modern day, when you take the word psyche and you translate it into English, it means soul. And if you move forward a little bit more, soul over time became synonymous with the word mind. All right, so we can trace that, and now it makes a little bit more sense how we went from psyche to psychology, study of the mind. Over time, the mind went from this idea of a really broad conceptual thing to something that is much more narrow. And now it's highly specialized, right? We have specialists within the field of psychology, within the field of neuroscience that look at tiny aspects, different aspects of the mind. Okay. Unsurprisingly, air was regarded as the main component of our psyche, right? Because air equals breath. Later philosophers analyzed the psyche in terms of its function in controlling aspects of our lives. All right, Pythagorean theorem. Have you heard of this? Yeah, geometry was maybe not my most successful class in high school, but I do remember the Pythagorean theorem. So what is that theorem about? No one remembers? You think about triangles? Does that help?
Base and the height of the triangle square will equal whatever the opposite will be.
Well, I'm going to have to unpack that a little bit, and I'll come back with more information next class. It's mentioned just a little bit in your book, but to that end also, guys, I want to make sure that you are really reading this book carefully. Okay, all right. So Pythagoras, he left no writings of his own, but he had quite a following, and people who studied with him or knew about him left a lot of writing, okay? So he attracted important schools of followers who discovered and emphasized what they called the wondrous regularities of mathematics and how math related to the general world, okay? Something that is discussed briefly in the book, which I would love to discuss in more detail, but part of my book fell apart and the Pythagoras part is not in here. So I will tell you what I remember, and it had to do with musical chords and progressions. It talks a lot about if you have a length of a musical string that's this long, if you cut it in half, then the pitch is going to go down by 1 octave. So just again, some interesting trivia. People who were mathematicians and followed Pythagoras attached genuine religious significance to the relationship between math and the physical world. And that's interesting because I think in modern times, few of us would think about math having any connection to religion. But at the time, so many things connected to religion. Okay. All right, getting ready to show you a video about Hippocrates. Please take notes. We'll follow with a brief discussion, and then I have some highlights of the information that's important to glean from the video as well as the textbook. Okay?
In the rich tapestry of ancient Greece, before the arrival of figures that would later revolutionize medicine, the landscape of health and wellness was indeed a mix of the mystical and the rudimentary. Divine intervention, superstitions, and a pantheon of gods heavily influenced the Greeks' understanding of illness and healing. Ailments were often seen as punishments or tests from the gods, and cures were sought in temples rather than clinics. The ancient Greeks believed in a balance of bodily fluids, or humors, that needed to be maintained for good health. Disruption in this balance was thought to cause illness. However, their approach was not entirely esoteric. For instance, they recognized the importance of diet, physical exercise, and even mental health to a person's well-being. They held a deep appreciation for the interconnectedness of the mind and body. Sanitation, while primitive by today's standards, was advanced for its time. The Greeks understood the value of clean water, and many cities featured complex sewage systems and public baths. Despite these advances, the reality of the times meant that plagues and epidemics were not uncommon, devastating communities and sparking searches for both spiritual and physical remedies. Medical treatments of the era leaned heavily on herbal remedies and natural solutions. Physicians, while respected, often operated based on trial and error, using plants, minerals, and sometimes rituals to treat patients. With no standardized practices, treatments could vary widely from one healer to another. In this complex matrix of spirituality, rudimentary science, and evolving public health, the stage was set for revolutionary thinkers to transform the medical realm of ancient Greece. Hippocrates, often hailed as the father of medicine, was born on the island of Kos in 460 BC. This picturesque island, located in the Aegean Sea, was part of the Greek Dodecanese archipelago, close to the coast of Asia Minor. Kos was a center for learning and culture during antiquity, making it fertile ground for young thinkers like Hippocrates. Details about Hippocrates' early life are scarce, with a blend of fact and legend weaving the narrative. It's said that he hailed from a family of physicians, being a descendant of Asclepius, the god of medicine, and thus was groomed from a young age to follow the medical traditions of his ancestors. His training likely included studying the works of previous thinkers and engaging in practical experience. Our primary knowledge of Hippocrates' life comes from later writings, mainly the works of the famous biographer Soranus of Ephesus, who lived in the 2nd century CE. It's worth noting that because Soranus lived several centuries after Hippocrates, some of the accounts may be interspersed with legends or interpretations of the time. Nonetheless, Soranus' writings provide invaluable insights into the life and times of this seminal figure in the history of medicine. As was customary for young men of his status, he would have received an education in reading, writing, and probably the basics of philosophy, which was foundational to Greek intellectual pursuits. His medical training likely began under the guidance of his father, Heraclides, who was a physician himself. This hands-on education would have entailed studying the medicinal properties of plants and herbs, understanding the human body's anatomy to the extent it was known at the time, and learning about the prevalent medical theories and practices. There's also evidence to suggest that Hippocrates traveled widely during his younger years, seeking knowledge and learning from other prominent healers of his time. These journeys across Greece and possibly to neighboring lands would have exposed him to diverse medical traditions and practices, enriching his understanding and approach to healing. In essence, the first years of Hippocrates' life were marked by rigorous education, both formal and experiential, that laid the foundation for him to later revolutionize the field of medicine. Hippocrates posited that diseases had natural causes, stemming from environmental factors, lifestyle, or the internal balance of the human body. Instead of attributing sickness to the whims of deities, he sought explanations in the realm of observable phenomena. His meticulous observations and clinical documentation formed the basis for diagnosis and treatment, emphasizing that a physician should rely on empirical evidence and logical reasoning. Among his innovative ideas was the theory of the four humors. He believed the human body contained four vital fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health resulted from the harmonious balance of these humors, and any imbalance led to disease. While this theory would later be revised with the advent of more advanced medical knowledge, it was a significant stride toward understanding bodily functions in physiological terms. Furthermore, Hippocrates stressed the importance of patient confidentiality, ethical considerations, and the moral duty of a physician. His teachings, consolidated in the Hippocratic Corpus, were not just about the technicalities of medicine but also encompassed the broader philosophy of patient care, emphasizing the holistic well-being of the individual. This collection is composed of around 60 works, but it's widely believed that not all of them were written by Hippocrates himself. Instead, they might have been the contributions of various authors spanning several generations, all influenced by the principles and teachings of Hippocratic medicine. The Hippocratic Corpus encompasses a diverse range of topics. Works like Airs, Waters, Places explore the idea that environmental factors, such as the quality of air and water, play a crucial role in human health. Another text, Prognostics, delves into the art of predicting the course of diseases based on observable symptoms, emphasizing the importance of observation in medicine. The collection also includes Epidemics, which provides detailed case studies of various illnesses and their treatments. Throughout these writings, the overarching theme is the systematic and rational approach to understanding and treating diseases, which was a pioneering mindset in the realm of ancient medicine. The Hippocratic Oath is one of the most recognized and enduring documents in medical history. Attributed to Hippocrates, the ancient Greek physician, this oath serves as a guide on the ethical behavior expected of physicians. The oath outlines the responsibilities and duties of doctors towards their patients and society. It touches on aspects like patient confidentiality, treatment methods, and the moral implications of medical decisions. The core idea behind the oath is the well-being of the patient, the confidentiality of patient information, avoiding harm, refraining from unnecessary procedures, and upholding the sanctity of life. Today, despite significant advancements in medical knowledge and technology, the Hippocratic Oath remains relevant. It provides a foundation for medical ethics and symbolizes the transition of medical students into the professional world when recited in graduation ceremonies. The oath acts as a constant reminder of the humanistic aspects of medicine, emphasizing the need for empathy, ethics, and human connection in healing. Over time, it has been modified to address contemporary issues in medicine, such as research ethics and organ transplantation. A particularly intriguing episode in Hippocrates' life involves his supposed encounter with the great Persian king, Artaxerxes I. According to some historical accounts, during a Persian campaign in Greece, a deadly plague broke out in the Persian army, decimating the troops and posing a significant threat to King Artaxerxes himself. Desperate for a solution, Artaxerxes, having heard of Hippocrates' renowned medical expertise, sent envoys to Kos with a letter and gifts, requesting the physician's assistance in treating his army. The king's letter promised vast wealth, honor, and land in return for Hippocrates' services. Hippocrates, however, declined the king's generous offer. His decision was rooted in patriotism. He did not wish to assist the invaders of his homeland. Instead of being lured by riches and prestige, Hippocrates chose loyalty to his people, highlighting his unwavering ethics. Another memorable episode centers around the city of Athens during a devastating outbreak. The city-state of Athens was once struck by a mysterious and deadly plague during the Peloponnesian War. This plague wreaked havoc, killing a significant portion of the population, including the famous Athenian statesman, Pericles. The situation was dire, with bodies piling up and morale plummeting. Hippocrates, hearing of this calamity, decided to visit Athens to help. According to the tale, upon his arrival, he observed the city's environment and the condition of those affected. He theorized that the disease was linked to the water sources of Athens. To test his hypothesis and to offer some respite, he recommended setting up large cauldrons of boiling wine to purify the air and provide clean liquid for consumption. While this remedy might sound curious by modern standards, the act of boiling could have inadvertently killed off some pathogens in the water. And whether due to this intervention or other factors, the plague's intensity eventually decreased. It's believed that Hippocrates lived to be around 90 years old, a remarkable age for his time. This longevity is often attributed to his holistic approach to health, emphasizing a balanced diet, regular exercise, and the power of natural healing. His commitment to these principles suggests that he might have practiced what he preached, leading to his own extended lifespan. As for his death, details are sparse. Historical accounts don't provide a precise cause or circumstance surrounding his passing. Some sources suggest he died in Larissa, Thessaly, though this, too, is debated. What remains consistent across accounts is that he left behind an enduring legacy, with his teachings continuing to shape medical thought for centuries. While the specifics of Hippocrates' last days might remain a mystery, his influence on the medical field is undeniable. His dedication to a systematic and ethical approach to medicine paved the way for future generations, ensuring that his impact would be felt long after his passing.
Okay, so I think we can all acknowledge how impressive Hippocrates was, right? Just so many ideas that have carried on into present day. It's pretty astonishing, right? What I'd like for you to do now is I'm going to break you up into groups of 3, and I want you to do 2 things. So as a group, you're going to decide on everything that was presented in the video, what were the top 5 items, so the most important items in your mind. And then what you're going to do is I want you to label those in degree of importance. So if you did sort of like a taxonomy, you're going to go from, I watched this video, you're going to share it with someone, what would you say was the most important idea, followed by 4 more ideas, okay? All right, so let's see. Let's do 1, 2, 3 as a group. So some of you will have to move. We'll do 1, 2, 3 here. This looks like a natural grouping, all right. And let's do here and 3 here, okay? All right. So I would like to hear from each of the groups after you have a few moments to do this. Thank you.
So much motivation.
I don't particularly like I could wait.
Which is just the guide to ethical behavior that we still use to this day. Doctors to base their morality off of. It's also very important. So we're supposed to say the recency thing, where the king had like plague and all the soldiers and he denied a duty of loyalty. And being very strong in this. Yeah, very strong ethics.
I guess the main deal, if you were describing this video to someone else, is
Holistic approach of things.
Like for natural medicine, diets, and all that stuff, and then he lived longer because of those reasons. So now do we just rank 5 of them?
what do you guys think?
I think we definitely need to put in the Hippocratic Corpus, the oath, the doctor oath.
They said his dad.
I forgot. I don't know if you guys caught the name, but it's like the 4 main, because it was like blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile.
They're too small for Congo.
More humors.
Yeah.
Sorry for easdropping,
No,
but
you're good.
I wanted to let you know.
His belief
I think Hippocratic
wasn't
Yeah, they were blood,
test
phlegm,
from the
yellow
gods.
bile, black bile.
It wasn't a punishment.
it wasn't.
Yeah. He says that
I don't know, I was just yapping.
ailments were often seen as punishments or tests from the gods and cures for humanity. So it was like he wanted to be dirty and pray.
And one of the other things I found interesting was before he came around, they kind of would attribute sickness to the limbs of the gods. And then once he came along, he was like, no, it should be relying on evidence rather than empirical. Yeah, empirical evidence rather than the whims of God.
We put the oath,
The Hippocratic Oath, okay.
the initiative to seek out information, so it's just not the only one doing it.
Yeah, and I think also like the trial and error that he did, it was systematic.
The deities and stuff, yeah.
And his beliefs.
The belief that like wasn't a test from the gods and changing.
That's really important, yes, good,
Yeah.
good.
Changing that, like if you wanna get better, you have to pray versus
I
actual medicine.
guess what I'm trying to say is,
Oh,
yes,
It's from the gods, then you
believed
can't,
more in.
it's out of your control, that's exactly right,
protecting
yeah.
himself rather than what else. You know, cause I think.
Okay,
they
top
believe that the
idea, I'm
whims of the
especially
gods and
gonna
stuff like that,
ask
so-
you, because you're gonna go into medicine, so what do you think was the top idea?
Why would they think that was?
We settled on Hippocratic Oath, I think all that on it.
Okay.
What do you think? What we've got down so far is just Hippocratic Oath or
That's four.
like blood, pouring bile,
There you go.
both yellow and black.
Yes,
His main approach towards like medicine, like logic and reason instead of like solely religion.
I know,
Right, right, and then also, you know, mixed with some trial and error, but you do hear the word like hypothesis being used, which is, that's like a game changer.
Yeah. Practicing what he's preaching.
Who's watching this with me?
Right, so I say that would be.
You could make it. Firstly was the promotion of politics.
Okay.
Like,
Yeah.
it's kind of come around full circle, so
Like they just couldn't have gotten there without.
the full.
Yeah, I mean, cause that's what they would do, right, was,
Even physicians.
it said right here, I wrote down, they leaned more on herbal remedies, and physicians were very much trial and error.
Ethics could be used
I guess, I'm guessing
for like organ.
he was too, or was it just?
Ethics could be
Health and
used.
sanitation.
Things, we only have a certain number of.
It kind of made it seem like he was
To give.
even with that, or you
Is
know,
this
like
gonna take
with liver
it?
transplants,
Yeah.
they kind of
Yeah.
does, but good.
And what could be.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, we're really debating this. Was
Yeah, I think
he
it's pretty.
the son of a god?
Oh, he was the son of a physician.
I kept thinking he said god, I'm like, what, why is he not a god?
The
they
Hippocratic
mentioned
corpus is number 4.
Oh, okay,
Who's the
that's
god
what
of-
Produced by its followers.
Yeah.
Okay, that's where I got.
You're not losing it, it was there, but just different.
So even today, like you see the
Okay,
60
top-
or so. I mean, there was just that statement that they said
We
where
said his
he was like
empirical
coming for
evidence
people to think that diseases have natural causes,
Because
that's not what
before
the
it was
gods
just like
being used.
accident, right?
That's
Cause I
maybe
thought,
that's
cause I don't know, I don't know if
We
you've
could have
seen
gotten
this, I think it talks
other-
about like most of his stuff was done by like someone who lived later than he did, right? It wasn't him.
I like that,
I wrote it
okay,
down.
you have a little bit of a
Yeah,
different
it's
take
just-
from the rest of the class, so
So I
I'm
forgot his
sure
name.
to have
Let me
you.
just read
Yeah, it
through,
was
it's like all four of the names.
I forgot what his name was, but somebody wrote.
We said what
most of his
the
words
keywords
were-
were like.
And nobody wanted to basically general stuff.
So we have four, right?
And that's like elements were punishments for the gods, but he didn't put
Right.
it by.
We have to-
And we don't wanna be, you know, when it comes to
Right.
human
And then just
bodies.
rate them to
Okay,
what's
the
more.
modeling one was interesting to me, but I like your
What's
idea.
the most important,
Everybody
what
else
did you
who
have?
would know that.
Colby, your group.
Your understanding.
We had the Hippocratic.
I didn't know, let's say that was number 1.
Okay.
I'm full.
General consensus, but we have a good argument for something else over there, so. All right, take a couple minutes more and then I'd like to hear
Anybody
from.
and then
We
our
just
final
give
was a presentation, so like nobody knew anybody and then you have to go reflect on that.
Just like.
Do you have another one?
Makes
Build yourself.
this person. He's at the 4 cameras.
Cause they said a lot of it was like a mixture of like.
Probably went down like that.
Environment.
Blood, phlegm, yellow bowel.
We had to read a more judge.
They were saying a lot of testimonies were like testimonies on his work were mixed with legend.
Yellow, it's yellow bile and black.
Black and yellow. All right, has everyone had substantial time to come up with your top 5? Yeah, there are a lot more that are super important, but we'll just stop there. Okay, so I would like to hear from a couple of the groups. Everyone ready to go? Yeah? So very top thing.
We put the promotion of ethics.
Okay. Okay, others, what did you say?
For ours, we put the Hippocratic Oath.
Okay, which ties into that,
That's
right?
it, yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna just put hip oath. Just remember Hippocrates, not hippopotamus, all right? And then back here, we had a different way of looking at it, which I think is interesting and a good way of looking at it too. So, do you want to speak on behalf of your group?
We said that his empirical evidence and logical reasoning was number one, because none of his ideas would have came without the evidence or the reasoning.
Okay, so we would never have gotten to the Hippocratic Oath had it not been for him having this deliberate approach to understanding the human body, looking at illness and how to treat illness. All right, so before we go on, there's this word empirical. What is empiricism? If you're using the empirical method to understand something, what are you doing?
Can't remember the show. It was like an old, probably 1950s maybe.
Okay, I'm not quite that old.
He would always flip his badge out and he's like, just the facts, man. It's like
Yes,
car
Dragnet?
I think that might have, I was thinking like
Okay.
Dragnet, Car 54, you know, one of those.
Right, right.
When I was-
Okay, are those names familiar to anyone else? No, okay. Well, thank you, Eric. Thank you for that. It landed for me.
But it's just the facts.
Just the facts, okay? So if you use the empirical method to understand the world, you're understanding it through the senses. So what you can see, what you can taste, what you can touch, smell, etc. All right? And this is a good way of getting through the world a lot of the times. However, our senses can sometimes be faulty. So in research methods, I give the example of you're getting ready to drink milk, okay? And we'll talk like old school 2% milk or buttermilk. I don't know. My grandpa drank that. A little chunky for me, but you know. So think about this. You go into the refrigerator and you need to know, is this milk still good? That's an important question for you to ask, right? So what would be the first thing most of you would do, or what would you do?
Smell it.
Or you might look at the
Expiration days.
Okay. All right. So we're using, we have some material at our fingertips, so to speak. We have the expiration date, which might be my go-to first. I might prioritize that as number one. And then we have our olfactory senses. We're going to smell it. Okay. And so let's say it's just like milk's expensive, right? So it's a little bit past the expiration date, about 2 days. Would you be willing to do that if it smelled okay? All right.
Yes.
Now, how many of you had COVID at some point and lost your sense of smell? Yeah, I did for quite some time. It's just, it's come back now, but it's taken a long time. If you were to right away smell the milk to see if it smelled okay, if you had COVID, you'd think this milk is fine, right? Until later. So the empirical method, like I said, it can be a great way of understanding the world. In many ways, it's better than just going solely on our intuition, right? Or solely on what an authority tells us. But it can be flawed. But the empirical method is part of the scientific method. So that's a huge legacy. So I can see justification for both of those, or basically all three of those being taught. What were other important points that you gleaned from the video?
His separation between the gods affecting your health versus physical affecting your health.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
In the video, it said that a lot of the like methods to cure illness was to find it in a temple or to pray, and Socrates kind of brought the like actual medicine and changing of the diet and the physical healing.
Yeah, so it's really interesting because later on we go completely away from the holistic view of healing someone. But yeah, he said, you know, maybe there's more to this, because if the gods are doing it, you have no control over that, right? So why would you seek help for something, right? But if you do have some control, then you know where to go. And the physician then can be an evaluator of symptoms, right? And then based on what you have, can prescribe. Good, very good. Something else that you had in your top 5?
Health and sanitation.
Health and sanitation, okay. Talk to me about that just a little bit.
He did put a big emphasis on like, obviously like sanitation, because they were like more advanced than the times they like had their own like sewage like systems, and then like public baths, which promoted even more like better hygienic like.
Exactly. It's hard to think back to a time when that was like really fancy, right? Or really modern. Yeah, so really advanced sewage system. There was an emphasis on cleanliness, right? And then I just want to think back on this same train of thought. There was an outbreak, right? Lots of people dying, talked about it kind of toward the end of the video. And no one could figure out, why are these people dying? Well, what was suggested as a possible cause?
Water source.
Yeah, so at least they had their eye on the water source and knew when it was good, and then they were able to think, maybe it's from this. We're consuming water, it could be that. So what did they do? Did they boil water? Did they boil wine?
The wine.
They boiled wine, okay? So, interesting. But drinking that did seem to have some medicinal value. And that's the idea of having like an antiseptic approach to things. Good. All right. How about 2 more?
So we had 2 ideas that kind of tie into the same thing, but everything in moderation, everything in balance.
Good. Excellent. And emphasis on the mind, body, so eating well, physical health, studying. One more. Yes.
His identification of the 4 humors, blood, yellow bile, black bile, and.
Very good. And what did he say for optimal health? What needed to be going on with the bile and phlegm?
They need to all be in balance.
So an imbalance of one led to dis-ease, right? Okay. And those ideas, I mean, most people in Western medicine don't talk about phlegm and bile, but those sorts of ideas have been transposed over time. And so it's just amazing if you think back to so long ago, and when most everyone believed that God sort of ruled the world and we didn't have a lot of control over our life, there was someone like Hippocrates. So anything else from that video? Anything you found interesting beyond what we talked about? Or I'm assuming you found some of it interesting. Anything else?
Just one, that we don't have a whole lot of information about how or when he died. I think it was just probably the modern internet age. But if somebody with that big of an impact, like even Steve Jobs, like I remember he died of pancreatic cancer.
Yeah.
But yet, like, and he was not probably nearly as big of an influence on my world as, Hippocrates has been. And yet we still.
Yeah, that's true. We do know, though, that he lived for a really long time, and that may be due to a great extent to how he looked after himself, right?
That's what you preach.
Huh? Practice what you preach. Sometimes I'm really good at that, sometimes not so much. Yeah, but we could take, he was pretty good. He was like pretty good at a lot of things, huh? All right. Anything else from that video? I looked through a lot of videos and I found that was the one that I think ties in most nicely with the class and was also something that was somewhat entertaining to watch. So I hope that you enjoyed. Okay. All right, so the Hippocratic corpus was mentioned, but corpus was not defined. What you need to know about that is corpus means body. So the Hippocratic corpus means body of work, all right? We talked about the humoral theory and the humors, the value of balance and moderation, and that we do no harm. And when we can, we do something that's going to benefit our patient. And a lasting legacy that you pointed out established a basic platform for responsible, observationally based medical practices that are still honored today. All right. We need to talk about the sophists before we start the conversation on Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. So, briefly, we know that Sophia means wisdom, right? So think back, and there's this idea, or the idea of a sophist is these are individuals who were paid for imparting wisdom to others. So these were people who were very well respected in the upper echelon of government, what have you, well educated for that time people, and they were tasked with educating people like them, basically. Okay, so people would hire a sophist and they would work with members of the aristocracy, with people who had a lot of money and power and influence. And the idea was the sophists are going to train the leaders of tomorrow, all right? What they talked a lot about is rhetoric. So political dialogue engagement. So we're shaping these people to be great thinkers and be able to lead politically. They also tried to figure out the basis of reality, you know, just a little thing like that, known as metaphysics. Yeah, and so in terms of rhetoric, public speaking was super important. Right, and we think back to how much Greeks valued their language and thought it superior to others. But you got to be able to get your point across right and clearly. Okay, we may not get through all of this video today, but we're going to take the rest of class to watch it. What this video provides is a general overview of the people, places, and things we're going to be discussing in detail next week, okay? I will make sure that you are able to download the PowerPoint so you can view these videos, but just understand that the videos build on the content in the book, and when you are taking an exam, that will be included in terms of the testing material, okay? All right. And then watch for a short assignment. It's going to be a paragraph, 8 to 10 sentences over a topic that will be due on Tuesday. I will post that in course resources with a big assignment 1 on it. No glitter. I don't know how to do that. Oh no.
Throughout history, each era has had within it a resounding voice.
Pop quiz. Are you a Platonist or an Aristotelian? An idealist or an empiricist? Do you think up neat rules to describe the universe and then try to fit data into your theory? Or do you observe the world and draw conclusions from what you see? Do you trust math or your senses? Before you decide, let's take a trip to urban Athens, circa 399 BCE. Last week, we met the pre-Socratics. Despite having by any reasonable standard invented science in Europe, these thinkers are lumped together today as simply not Socrates. So, who was this Marty Pants? Socrates didn't have a single clearly formulated natural philosophy. He didn't even study nature. He studied politics and morality and prided himself on not claiming to know things. But Socrates did 2 important things. He asked a lot of questions, which influenced how philosophers went about teaching their ideas, and he inspired the 2 rock stars of classical Greek philosophy. Socrates held that knowledge comes from asking questions. So many questions questions. His name is attached to the Socratic method, in which you constantly ask questions so that students can steadily break down a big problem into smaller parts they can test hypotheses against. It's okay if they realize that a hypothesis is wrong. In fact, it's good. It means they're moving away from falsehood. The Socratic method is an example of negative hypothesis elimination, or proving that something is wrong to narrow down the possibilities of what might be right. But Socrates' biggest legacy may be his student, Plato, and his student Aristotle. Both were inspired by Socrates' methods, but they arrived at some very different conclusions about the world. We know a lot about Socrates thanks to his students. Chiefly, Plato founded a physical school called the Academy to train Athenians in how to think like Socrates. Plato wrote down dialogues between Socrates and other thinkers, including Parmenides. He was the Eleatic philosopher who believed that nothing really changes and thus we can't trust our senses. This had a big impact on Plato, whose best known works include Republic, in which Socrates defines justice and argues for rule by a philosopher king instead of democracy, and Timaeus, in which Socrates talks about the nature of the universe. Plato had a big impact on thinking about thinking. Today, we still use Plato's name for a place of philosophical learning, academy, to describe the concept of higher education in general. At the original academy, Plato emphasized training in how to think properly. Over the door of the academy was inscribed the dictum, "Let no one enter here who is ignorant of geometry." Plato based his own philosophy on geometric laws. He taught a Pythagoras-inspired idealism, or a theory of nature based on perfect abstractions, rules of which real-world stuff could only ever be imperfect examples. So Plato had to fit his observations to his theory. That idealism is one of the reasons people think of Plato as more of a philosopher than a scientist. Plato built on the work of the pre-Socratic schools, but he developed a more complete way of looking at the natural world than they did. And his students took off in search of solutions, even as they changed his underlying theory. The only Greek who wrote more philosophy than Plato was Plato's own star student and rival, Aristotle. Compared to Plato's idealistic abstractions, Aristotle's philosophy makes more common sense. His ideas are based on empirical evidence. He observed the world and then came up with a theory that explained it. This order of operations is at the heart of modern scientific practices. Aristotle was from Macedonia in the north of Greece, but he studied at Plato's Academy in Athens for 20 years until Plato died. Afterward, Aristotle took a lucrative gig. King Philip II of Macedonia hired him as tutor to his son, Alexander. And you know this particular Alexander. He decided to conquer the entire Earth. Before age 30, he ruthlessly conquered much of Asia, Africa, and Europe, ruling over more area than anybody until Genghis Khan. Aristotle's influence on Alexander the Great reminds us that science is always social. From the very beginning, scientists have served bad, heartless dudes. Aristotle, a man who literally wrote the book Ethics, pushed his most famous pupil to invade Persia, kill barbarians, and become a brutal warlord. After Alexander died young, Aristotle went back to Athens to start his own school, the Lyceum. The Lyceum was pretty different from Plato's Academy. Because Aristotle liked plants and liked to walk and talk, his school wasn't in a building, but a grove of trees outside the city. And his school was called the Peripatetic, meaning walky, and thus informal, not like the Academy. It was during the Lyceum years that Aristotle probably wrote many of his most famous works, including Metaphysics, On the Heavens, On the Soul, which is actually an amazing book of protobiology meets psychology, and his school's highly influential set of textbooks on natural philosophy called Physics. How did Aristotle answer our big questions about physics, such as what was stuff and where are we? He posited a complete system joining the elements and the heavens. This became the basis for European thought about the physical world for 2,000 years. Let's compare Aristotle's system to his mentor Plato's in this episode's Thought Bubble. For Plato, the cosmos was perfect. It had perfect rules that could be studied, and all cosmic stuff was made up of atoms that were perfectly geometric, platonic solids, each creating one element. Tetrahedrons of fire, cubes of earth, octahedrons of air, icosahedrons of water, and dodecahedrons as the shape of the whole universe, like a giant celestial set of D&D dice. Plato's theory of the heavens stated that the wandering stars, that is the planets, followed a path of uniform circular motion. You see, the wandering stars must move in perfect circles since the cosmos is orderly. But this one is moving backwards. Plato's students could see that Mars, for one, seemed to jump backwards, showing retrograde motion. Plato didn't really have an explanation. European astronomers would spend the next 2,000 years meticulously trying to solve this problem, and they would end up learning a lot in the process. How did Aristotle build on Plato's system? Aristotle's cosmology was abstract too, but he attempted to make sense of observations about the world. He crossed those same 4 elements, plus a new anti-void called the ether, with 4 physical sensations, hot and cold, dry and wet, and used these to explain everything. Earth was the heaviest element, so it was the center of the cosmos. Water was lighter than Earth, so oceans rested on top of the Earth. So far, so good. Air's natural state is above water. That also checks out. Fire is on top of air, which is a little weird, but it does go up, I guess. And way out past these 4 terrestrial spheres, out past the moon, spun the stars, acting according to their nature as ethereal or perfect circle-moving objects. And nowhere, anywhere in this theory was a void. Nature abhors a vacuum. In Aristotle's cosmos, all of the elements were actively trying to get back to their natural states. Why did flames rise? They were just trying to get back to the fiery celestial realm above the air. Thanks, Thought Bubble. From the pre-Socratics to Plato to Aristotle, we've ended up with a bunch of spheres inside spheres, each with a natural tendency. This confirmed the average Bronze Age farmer's experience, and ours. The Earth seems to stand still, water sits on Earth, air isn't very heavy. Aristotle recognized that elements didn't always exist in their pure forms. A tree, for example, was a combination of earth, water, and air. Roots go down into the earth and branches go up into the air. His theories also worked for comparisons. Why does a book fall faster than a piece of paper? Well, because it has more earth in it. Aristotle could even explain natural phenomenon. Why does rain fall from the sky to the ground? Why do volcanoes shoot fire up? Obviously, this isn't how I think gravity works, but it's a way of explaining it that made sense to the ancient Greeks. Where Plato saw a world of ideal shapes, Aristotle had a theory that acknowledged that we're all kind of a hot mess. Things are naturally jumbled up, but always trying to get back to their essential place. Aristotle also loved looking at living things, and he looked closely. He noticed, for example, that the octopus can change color, which is awesome, and that male octopi have a special arm called a hectocotylus, which is something you should Google, because it's weird and kind of awesome, and it wasn't confirmed by scientists until the 1800s. Aristotle trusted that knowledge proceeded from the experience of the senses. In his works, such as History of Animals, among others, he wrote down observations like these about all kinds of organisms. He also tried to classify the world into an orderly system, giving rise to taxonomy. When he attempted to answer one of our questions, what is life, the taxonomy he created relied on a system of souls. Plants were the simplest group, with only a vegetative soul, which let them grow and reproduce. Animals had a vegetative soul too, but they also had a sensitive or animal soul, which let them sense and move. We humans were set apart as the highest group with the 3 souls: vegetative, animal, and rational. The rational soul explained why we can think and reflect on ideas on top of all that other stuff. This led Aristotle to further theorize that all things can be placed on a line from simplest/least soulful to highest/most soulful. On one end, he placed plants, then worms, and so on. These low animals bore their offspring cold, dry, and in thick eggs. The higher animals made warm and wet babies. So of course, at the other end of the line, Aristotle placed men, meaning not humans, but dudes. According to him, cold maternal blood produced inferior humans, girls, while hot paternal semen produced boys. Aristotle was maybe not someone we would want to elect as our philosopher king today, but Aristotle's system of classification again seemed to confirm his classical and medieval readers' daily experiences. His proto-biological ideas stuck around in various forms until Darwin, getting lumped under the heading of the Great Chain of Being, that all creatures on Earth stand somewhere on a ladder of perfection up toward God. You may have already guessed that this concept has been particularly troublesome when it comes to scientific racism, but that's a story for later. The creepier effects of some of his ideas aside, Aristotle had an answer for everything. For the most part, these ideas were based in observation and conformed to his common sense. His answers were able to explain how the world worked most of the time. Not only did
almost out of time. So I just wanted to say thank you for some really thoughtful discussions. I appreciate that. Please, as I said earlier, make sure you carefully read Chapter 1. I will post your assignment on announcements, and then I will open up a Dropbox tomorrow. My thinking on the assignment is that it's going to be, consider the content we covered today as it relates to your future career. Okay, so taking that, reflecting on it, and writing 8 to 10 sentences. Doable, I think? Yeah? All right. Have a great rest of your day. I'll see you next week.